Today's webinar will be presented by Catherine Bike. Catherine Bike serves as a registered dietitian nutritionist at the Center for Advanced Heart and Lung Disease at Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. She received her Bachelor's of Science in Nutrition at New Mexico State University and her Master's in Nutrition at Texas Women's University. She is honored to have worked in multiple capacities at Baylor Scott and White Health over many years. Currently employed in an outpatient clinic, she is dedicated to assisting people who want to be healthier identify what nutrition and lifestyle changes they are willing to make, and provide them with the support to be successful. She considered it a blessing to have served many wonderful and inspiring people over the years who live with PH. And just so you know, the low-sodium lifestyle is not just academic for Catherine. She has prepared many meals for many years for family members in her own home that have had to limit sodium for medical reasons. She has learned a lot of practical tricks to ensure meals are delicious and nutritious and does not require a lot of time and professional cooking skills. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to turn the presentation over to you, Katie.
Great. Thank you, Lori. Well, it's Monday, the week of Thanksgiving. The holidays are officially upon us once again. I imagine many of you have your holiday meal plans all set. Well, there are plenty more holiday meals and gatherings coming up, so I hope you find at least a few useful ideas as we focus on taking control of what we eat and specifically how much sodium we eat over the holidays. We will review general guidelines for how much sodium to consume. Then we will use some familiar holiday recipes to identify strategies to control sodium intake. And finally, we will consider how to limit sodium intake when eating out, such as at holiday parties and potlucks. First, let's take the time to reflect on what we want the holiday season to be like. Before all the rush and the stress of the holidays, how do you want to come to the table, so to speak? Instead of being caught up in all the things to do and the places to go, let's take some time to identify your personal desires for the holidays. For example, do you have some physical goals, which can include diet, weight, exercise, or other self-care behaviors? Maybe you have some social goals, such as seeing people or attending certain entertainment events that you only do during the holidays. There are emotional goals, such as planning to reserve time and energy for whatever refreshes you. Or maybe this year you want to specifically serve others who have needs that you can meet, knowing your selflessness will be a blessing to them. Maybe you want to make the spiritual meaning of the holidays part of your tradition and reflection. After identifying your goals and desires, the next step is to be intentional to make plans so those desires are realized. Let's say you want to come to the Thanksgiving meal relaxed and to have the energy to enjoy friends and family after the Thanksgiving meal. If that's important to you, what is in your control to make that desire come true? A common goal is to avoid gaining weight over the holidays. Without an intentional plan and the resolve to follow through, many people gain weight over the holidays. What follows is a New Year resolution to lose it and possibly a renewal of that gym membership. I hope you are encouraged to take the time to reflect on what you want for the holidays so that the commercialism and the stress of the season do not control you. Okay, let's bring it back to the goal to limit sodium over the holidays. Why? Well, you already know that. Eating excessive sodium can contribute to excessive fluid retention. And if the fluid retention is extreme, oral diuretics may be ineffective and must be given by IV or intravenously into the blood. And that generally requires a hospital admission. Well, avoiding this possible consequence from eating too much sodium is probably enough motivation to consider some of these strategies to limit excessive sodium consumption. I want to share a short story about how true this really is. I work at a large metropolitan hospital system in Dallas, Texas, and one year I overheard some of the nurses talking about staffing. I learned that between the months of October and March, there was consistently an increase in hospital admissions for IV diuretics to treat people with excessive fluid retention. Well, we all know that most people eat more food and eat more sodium during the holidays, but why are there more admissions beginning in October and continuing through February? Well, because in Dallas, the State Fair of Texas runs for 6 weeks beginning at the end of September, and the most popular activity there by far is to consume fatty and salty foods. Then there is Thanksgiving followed by December celebrations. And what continues at least through February? Professional football playoffs ending with the Super Bowl. So we developed resources to promote strategies to limit sodium at the state fair and at game day get-togethers. And today we'll look at some ideas specifically for holiday meals. I want to share some practical recipes with you that you can download and print off if you like them. As we examine some of the recipes, I will be mentioning how many milligrams of sodium are in different foods. Sodium is not the same as salt. Salt is only 40% sodium, but salt is a rich source of sodium. 1 level teaspoon of salt contains about 2,300 milligrams of sodium. So sodium is actually a mineral which functions in our body to hold on to fluid. It is important to consume some sodium or else we would become dehydrated. There is no absolute amount of sodium that every person needs, but as a general guideline, the goal is to limit sodium to about 2,000 milligrams in an entire day. So remember that number, 2,000 milligrams in an entire day. On an individual basis, this amount may vary, but there is no advantage to limiting sodium to less than about 1,500 milligrams daily. The issue is, in America, we tend to consume a lot of sodium, much more than 2,000 milligrams per day. If you have a tendency to hold on to too much fluid, eating too much sodium can make the problem worse. There are several ways to approach controlling how much sodium we eat so we don't consume over the 2,000 milligram daily limit, especially if we take diuretics or have a tendency to retain fluid. We know that on average, Americans consume about twice this amount daily. It is useful to choose seasonings without salt or sodium. Research has demonstrated this cuts sodium intake by about 10 to 15%. Processed foods that are processed with salt and sodium generally provide 75% of our total sodium intake. And then another 10 to 15% is just in foods naturally. So in choosing to eat what foods, limit those foods that have over 200 milligrams of sodium per serving. Use the Nutrition Facts food label as a measurement of serving size and sodium content. When choosing restaurant foods, if you can access nutrition information, use it when it is available and avoid selections especially loaded with sodium, and possibly find some balance by consuming foods low in sodium the rest of the day. The bottom line is that we know Americans consume almost 4,000 milligrams of sodium daily on average. We simply eat too much sodium and possibly even more over the holidays and when we eat out, unless we have a plan to limit sodium. So let's look at some recipes for some ideas to make those plans. The first recipe is just a very basic turkey recipe. It uses 3 ingredients that are low in sodium and can be enhanced to fit your preferences. Notice the turkey is fresh, not processed. Processed meats of any kind generally provide a lot of sodium. Consider this. Any fresh meat, whether it's beef, pork, poultry, fish, fresh meat naturally contains about 10 to 20 milligrams of sodium per ounce. However, when food companies process meat and they make them into deli or sandwich meats, sausage, ham, bacon, canned products, the food companies generally add enough sodium to increase the amount of sodium to 200 to 400 milligrams per ounce. That means that a 4-ounce portion of fresh meat provides a maximum of about 80 milligrams of sodium. After that same meat is processed, it provides a minimum of about 800 milligrams of sodium. And if we're aiming to limit our sodium intake to about 2,000 milligrams most days, that 4-ounce portion alone provides about 40% of our total daily allotment. The fresh meat would only provide about 4%. Frozen chicken and turkey are injected with a salt solution as a preservative to maintain moisture when frozen. This adds another 50 milligrams of sodium or so per ounce, which is still much less than processed meats. In general, basted turkeys have the most sodium, but always check the nutrition facts label for specific content of any product. The next ingredient that is essential for anyone who cooks very much and who limits sodium is a good low-sodium bouillon or soup base. These are available in grocery stores, but they are generally in a liquid form, so they can't be concentrated, or if they are in a dried form, they are sold in small containers. I want to refrain from recommending any specific brands. However, I have found that this is one item that is worth buying online and shipping it to your home, especially if you enjoy making soups. To find these products, search very low sodium soup base on your computer. You will find just a couple of such products that are dried and can be used as flavored liquids, such as in soups, or even added as a dry ingredient to recipes for enhanced flavor with little or no added sodium. Another website to identify specialty foods which are low in sodium and may or may not be in the regular grocery stores is Heart Healthy Market. The third ingredient for your turkey is anything that adds flavor without the salt. Poultry seasoning works great, or you can look at the ingredient list of poultry seasoning, and any of the herbs that are ground up can be used fresh or dried. Some people like to baste turkey in beer or wine to add flavor without adding salt. Whatever your preference, however, avoid cooking wines, which can provide up to about 185 milligrams of sodium per fluid ounce. Okay, let's move to the next recipe, pork loin. I added this recipe because some holiday traditions serve ham, especially for New Year's. Just a 3-ounce portion of cured ham contains about 1,100 milligrams of sodium. The same portion of fresh pork has less than 50 milligrams of sodium. Curing is a processing method where the meat is literally soaked in a salt solution. By the way, regular sandwich or deli meats that are not specifically processed with less sodium all contain as much sodium as cured ham. This means that processed turkey or chicken meat or most any other sandwich meat has about as much sodium as ham. And in America, the most popular lunch entree is, you guessed it, a sandwich with processed meat. People in America generally consume a lot of sodium because we tend to eat a lot of processed foods and restaurant food. For convenience, plan to have leftovers of home-cooked meals. Use them instead of processed meats to make a sandwich. Or better yet, ditch at least some of the bread and add some fresh vegetables to complement the meat. The next recipe is cornbread dressing, also known as stuffing. The cornbread can be made in advance and frozen until you are ready to make the dressing. Store-bought stuffing averages about 450 to 550 milligrams of sodium per 1 cup prepared serving. This recipe is much less than that. 1 serving of cornbread from a mix where all the dry ingredients are combined provides about 350 milligrams of sodium. You can make your own cornbread, such as in this recipe, adding no more than about 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt, if any, and it will provide about 100 milligrams of sodium per serving. This assumes that you use regular milk instead of buttered milk, but you can use the regular baking powder instead of the sodium-free baking powder, which is harder to find. Any kind of baking mixes, such as cake mixes, pancake mixes, muffin mixes, they are all generally loaded with sodium. And this is because they contain flour, salt, leavening agents such as baking powder and baking soda, and sodium-containing preservatives. This is similar to self-rising flour, which contains about 340 milligrams of sodium in just 1/4 cup. Regular flour provides about 1 milligram of sodium in 1/4 cup. Canned bread, such as biscuits, contain at least 350 milligrams of sodium per serving. Frozen prepared waffles and pancakes generally contain about 450 milligrams of sodium per serving. Sandwich breads average about 150 milligrams to 250 milligrams per slice. And Americans in general consume several servings of bread and bread products each day, which all add up. Consider how many of these products you generally eat on a daily basis. You may decide you could cut back or prepare some from scratch instead of using a prepared mix. Let's move on to a recipe for mashed potatoes. You could consider substituting some bread products with lower sodium sources of carbohydrates, such as potatoes, rice, and pasta. I selected this recipe because I like the addition of cauliflower and liberal amounts of garlic. This cuts the calorie and carbohydrate content and also adds many healthy nutrients. In addition to sodium, we tend to consume a lot of calories over the holidays. I use the leftovers from this mashed potato recipe to make baked potato soup. So fresh potatoes and even seasoned instant potatoes are actually very low in sodium, about 25 milligrams of sodium or less per serving. Sweet potatoes have a little more at about 75 milligrams per serving. And what goes with mashed potatoes? Gravy, of course. Most of the flavor from this recipe, gravy recipe, comes from meat drippings and the low sodium soup base we previously discussed, and fat. If you desire a creamy gravy, simply add some milk or fat-free half and half. They all work well. 1/4 cup of canned gravy or a prepared gravy mix provides at least 300 milligrams of sodium. That is in only 4 tablespoons. And who uses only 4 tablespoons of gravy? This recipe provides less than half of that, even if you were to add just a pinch of salt. I also included this recipe because I want to make the point that salt is what we call an acquired taste. If you thought to yourself, I could not eat canned gravy or any gravy made from a mix, it is just too salty. Well, if you feel that way, there is a good chance that your taste buds are sensitive to salt and you are already not consuming a lot of excess sodium. Human beings acquire a taste for salt when it is consumed. The more salt someone consumes, the more they prefer the taste of more salt. And the opposite is true. The more someone limits salt, the less they will desire highly salty products. It takes time to adjust salt preferences, but it is worth the effort for multiple health reasons beyond fluid retention. The next recipe is roasted green beans. But before we look at the recipe, let's examine the familiar and traditional green bean casserole. Consider the potential contributors of sodium for an entire recipe. 1 can of regular cream of mushroom soup contributes a whopping 2,000 milligrams. The milk provides just a little sodium, but even a small amount of soy sauce, 1 teaspoon, provides almost 300 milligrams of sodium. Then we add in 2 cans of green beans, which have been drained, and top with a small can of French fried onions for an additional 2,000 milligrams of sodium. This recipe makes about 6 servings that are 1/2 cup each. Each of these 1/2 cup servings provide about 700 milligrams of sodium. Remember, we are aiming for about 2,000 milligrams of sodium over an entire day. There are several strategies to reduce the sodium content of this traditional recipe. There is low sodium canned cream of mushroom soup that provides 60 milligrams of sodium per can. Lower sodium soy sauce still can make a significant contribution if it's used liberally. 1 teaspoon provides 175 milligrams of sodium. But if you like soy sauce, maybe in Chinese food, and you use it generously, it is very easy to make a low sodium soy sauce low in sodium. Just search low sodium soy sauce recipe on the computer, and there are many to choose from. Back to the recipe, the portion size of the canned French fried onions could be decreased by 2/3 to still get the crunch. Substituting fresh or unseasoned frozen or no salt added canned green beans alone would decrease the sodium by 30%. Combined, these modifications decrease the sodium from about 700 milligrams per 1/2 cup serving to about 100 milligrams of sodium per serving. That is a huge improvement. Or you could try this roasted green bean recipe. If you like a little crunch to add a different texture, add some sliced water chestnuts or sliced almonds. Probably the only advantage to this recipe over the lower sodium version of the traditional recipe would be that any leftovers could easily be frozen or used fresh as a great addition to homemade soups and stews. And speaking of leftovers, the next recipe is one of my favorites: roasted harvest vegetables. Roasting vegetables intensifies the flavors without adding salt. The trick is when you spread the vegetables on the baking pan, spread them out enough so there is a single layer of vegetables with just a little space around each of them, even if you need to use more than 1 pan. This allows the vegetables to roast better on the outside, sealing in the flavors, as opposed to steaming the vegetables when they are all packed together. I like to add generous amounts of fresh garlic. The vegetables listed are only a few of the options available. Consider also peppers, mini acorn, purple yams, sweet potatoes, butternut squash, beetroot, red onions, whatever you like. The beauty of the variety of these vegetables surrounding the turkey make for a beautiful table. And the best part of using any of these leftover roasted vegetables in homemade soups and stews is wonderful. If you plan to use these leftovers that way, just consider the size and shape you want when you cut your vegetables. You can use very low sodium soup base for the soups and low sodium V8 juice for stews. While Americans in general consume too much sodium, we also in general do not consume enough vegetables. So this recipe provides a wonderful way to incorporate vegetables that can be made all year long. The next idea is a simple fresh fruit and vegetable platter. Here are just a few suggestions to start. Fresh fruits and vegetables are nutritious, easy to prepare, always low in sodium, and a welcome addition to any party or potluck during the holidays and year-round. To complement the vegetables, I've included a recipe for ranch dressing that is low in sodium and can be used as a dip for the vegetables. Any salad dressing or dip can be made from scratch to control sodium, and side benefit, it's also much cheaper than your bottled or ready-made salad dressings. Bottled ready-to-use salad dressings and dried mix that is prepared provides anywhere from 200 to 400 milligrams of sodium in just 2 tablespoons. And again, how many people limit themselves to 2 tablespoons? Do a recipe search specifying low sodium, and you will find many options. Another alternative is to use olive oil and a flavored vinegar bottled separately as a dressing for salads. This is an option you can request when eating out. The next recipe is for cranberry gelatin salad. This really does not have much to do with sodium, but it is a nice way to incorporate additional fruits and vegetables. As you can tell, I preach that line of advice very often. What I like about this recipe is that it is a sweet side dish that incorporates cranberries, which are traditional at many holiday meals. It can be modified for diabetics with the use of fruits canned in juice instead of syrup and sugar-free gelatin. Plus, it can be made a day or two in advance. The last recipe is a simple recipe that incorporates the nutritional goodness of fruit with the crunchiness of granola. So here we have an easy fruit cobbler. Many fruit, pecan, and pumpkin pies with pie crust provide anywhere from 300 to 500 milligrams of sodium per serving. Check the Nutrition Facts food label for sodium content before purchasing hot cereals, instant hot cereals, and ready-to-eat cold cereals. You will likely be surprised how much sodium many cereals contain. Alternatively, granola cereals are generally low in sodium. And a tip to add more flavor without additional sodium, add wine if allowed by your physician. If you do a computer search saying wine powder for cooking, there are wine powders available for purchase online that are reconstituted for cooking. The Burgundy wine is excellent in this berry cobbler, and it is also good in tomato-based sauces and soups. Sherry wine powder is a flavorful addition to many soups, and the Chablis wine powder is good with some gravies. The trick is to always add the powder to cold liquid so it dissolves as the liquid is stirred and heats up. Back to the recipe, you can always use canned fruit filling and top it with granola cereal. All fruits, even canned, are always very low in sodium. Wow, we have summarized a lot of recipes and a lot of strategies to control sodium in the food we eat. So let's summarize some of the ideas that were identified. First, be mindful of that 2,000 milligram daily limit. Your doctor or dietitian may give you a slightly different limit. I like to use 2,000 because it makes the math easy. But it does help to know how to compare if a product is high or low in sodium when compared to 2,000. Obtain a low sodium or very low sodium soup base if you do much cooking. Use fresh meats instead of processed meats. Use handmade or homemade baked products over mixes, and consider how many bread-type products are consumed on a daily basis. If it turns out that more than 4 to 6 per day are consumed, you may consider substituting some of these bread products with potatoes, rice, or pasta sources of carbohydrates. Consider using homemade gravies and salad dressings with less sodium. Eat your vegetables, fresh, frozen, no salt added can, roasted, steamed, and even concealed, like in the mashed potato recipe, is always a way to incorporate more vegetables. And remember that fruits are always low in sodium. Well, we've talked a lot about homemade foods, but let's briefly look at some strategies to limit sodium when eating out or going to a party or potluck. Think fresh food, cook-to-order choices at a restaurant. Ask that no salt, MSG, soy sauce, or other high-sodium sauces be added to the food. Try to choose foods that are grilled, baked, broiled, and steamed, and then specify that no salt be added. Salad dressings and sauces can be served on the side and used in small amounts. Avoid or limit the portion sizes of foods that you know to be high in sodium. These would include soups, chips and salsa, cheese dishes, processed meats and cheeses, and marinated and breaded foods. When you eat out, budget your sodium by eating only foods low in sodium the rest of the day. You can control portion sizes to limit sodium also. Consider sharing a meal with a friend, or take part of your meal home for another day. And if anyone wants to make a meal for you or a recipe for you, consider sharing your favorite low-sodium recipes or any of these recipes today. For parties and potlucks, take food that you know are low in sodium that you can eat. Before we wrap up, I just want to reinforce that it's not all about sodium. It is really about the whole composition of what we eat and what we choose to value that influences our food choices. Every person is different. Even if we all have the same goal to limit sodium, how we approach that goal with a plan is different. I hope you find some of this information useful. Just remember, the food you eat can either be the most powerful form of medicine or the slowest form of poison.